Thank you so much, Kostek. I actually had the privilege to meet one of the very last Jews of Egypt last year, wow. Magda Harun. There are about 12 elderly ladies left, and she is both and, not either or. She's Jewish and she's Egyptian, and there's a tremendous cultural heritage that soon will need support, possibly from other communities throughout the world, such as the Maimonides synagogue, for example, where he taught and prayed many hundreds of years ago. I now do want to welcome up our distinguished Paideia panelists, and that is Eva Exelius. Please take the stage. Eva is a literary critic. She has a PhD in comparative literature. And she's also an author of Facts of Judaism, which is a book in schools about Judaism. Fabian Sporowski is the rabbi in a Jewish community in Manchester. He was ordained a few years ago from the Abraham Geiger College in Berlin. And I also want to introduce John Roberts on stage, who has an MA in history from the University of Dublin.
No, Queen's University Belfast.
Queen's University in Belfast. Please welcome. And Eva, if you could start your reflections.
This will work? No. How do I put it on?
Must be a switch or something.
While we're working with the technology here, I want to remind each one of you, Eva, Fabian, and John, to kiss the microphone. Hold it really close to your lips. Thank you.
Do I kiss it enough? Close enough?
That's good.
Okay. Listening to Konstanty and Gebert's reflections and others today, and also last weekend at the inauguration of this house, on home, slavery, exile and diaspora, I feel a need to find out the basis of it. Where did it all start? And where has the experience its roots? And my thought immediately finds its way to the very beginning, to the very first story and the very first words about the beginning, Bereshit. Our first home as human beings was there, in the Garden of Eden. All the basic characteristics are to be found here. It has borders, clear borderlines. There is an inside, there is an outside, like the house, Beit. And it's a place of belonging, of safety and security, a place to be called the original home. But Bereshit also includes the story of the expansion. Adam and Eve, our common ancestors, were driven out from paradise, first home of mankind. And from that very moment, we all, as human beings, have in our collective memory the experience of having once had an original home, but being driven out from it into an eternal exile. And the manifold of interpretations are like the Midrashim made of this story of stories. And like the Midrashim, one interpretation never excludes the others. But one reading that I found both astonishing and inspiring is a psychological one. That it metaphorically tells the story of human development. In the very beginning, we were all driven out from paradise, the paradise of the warm universe of the mother's womb, into the exile, the cold air of postnatal life, and finding an interim home in the dependence of the nourishing body of the mother or the parent, before finally being separated from the parents and from the parental home. And some theologians do an analogous reading of the separation between God and man. From the beginning there was only God, the divine real, and then the divine real rebirth, or however you want to express it, to the worldly creation. And there was the separation, and we have to manage it all on our own. But for most Jews, the Exodus is the primary story of exile and expulsion. It's not analogous to Bereshit, but reversed. We were driven out, not from paradise, but from a land of slavery, to reach out for the promised land of milk and honey. But the two stories have the common structure: borderlines, the inside and the outside, the home, although temporary, as foreigners and in slavery, that we had to leave for an exile in the desert, in search of the land, Haaretz, the true home. So, what can we learn from these texts in the context of today's Beit theme? Did the writer of the Torah know what would happen to the Jewish people during the following millennia? Is it to be read as a prophecy? No, of course not. Home and expulsion, paradise and exile, the land and the desert, they are all basic concepts and polarities in the human mind. Powerful images for universal human experiences. They do tell the special story of the Jewish people, but be it mythical or historical, but at the same time, they represent experience that we share with all other human beings. The expulsion can be from a family, from a personal relationship, from a people, from a country, a language, a homeland. And these days, they are literally and emotionally and socially experienced by thousands of migrants and refugees. So, rather than speaking of the special Jewish experience of Galut, exile and diaspora, I would like to emphasize both their inner reality and their universality. The inner reality of home, the borderlines, inside and outside, exile and diaspora, has a dialogical relationship to factual reality. It's up to each one of us to connect them, to find out, or even to choose what to consider our home and our people, and also how inclusive or exclusive, excluding these concepts are to be. And I think the danger is to not being able to differentiate between the two, the inner and the outer reality. Because the outer one is just a manifestation of the inner reality. And I think also to continue on the political theme, that means if you can differentiate, you can, the question is also still open, whether a shared territory could be the home of both of you. Both the Torah, the Jewish tradition, and the Jewish experience thus has so much to teach, to tell, and to share in our times of migration, persecution, xenophobia, loneliness, and suffering. So, speaking with Emmanuel Levinas, who gave name to my class at Paideia, to see the other, to see, identify with his or her pain as if it were your own, is an ethical imperative. That means also his or her experience of the home, or lack of home. And to speak also with Hillel, never to do to the other what you don't want him or her to do to you. May we never do or be to the other as they once were to us. That is the essence of Jewish ethics. Thank you so much for that.
So thank you for having me here. The thoughts that came to mind to me when thinking about Beit avadim in the Jewish context of slavery and home is I'd like to call it perhaps going from a Beit avadim to from the house of bondage to a Sukkot Shalom, which is a very Jewish thing. Yes, a Sukkah is a very Jewish thing, and also peace. I think it is a process. I wouldn't necessarily define it as an exile. I would define it as a divine recipe. God already told Abraham that we will be in Egypt. We were not a people there. He turned on the timer, put the cake in the oven, so to speak, a very painful one. And at some point we were liberated from Egypt as a people to start this process that will hopefully lead us to a Sukkot Shalom, which is what we pray, which is what we pray to God that He will spread over us His shelter of peace, Sukkot Shalom, rather than a home that is a fortress or, to others. So before we talk about the house of bondage or what is the Jewish concept of a home, I'd like to define what is freedom a little bit Jewishly. And I also think of Levinas, interestingly enough, because our parting point was the house of bondage. But we went from slavery not to freedom. We went from slavery to unfreedom, as Levinas calls it. You might recall the Midrash of God saying to the Israelites, lifting up the mountain and saying, this is your Torah. If you accept it, all is well. If not, this will be your grave. That is not necessarily an option, that's not exactly free choice as I would define it. So we went from being, from the house of bondage to the unfreedom or being a servant of God. We're Avdei Adonai, right? We have, there are all sorts of beautiful piyutim about it, slaves of slaves are this, and the slaves of God are that. But even, as the name Abdallah reminds us, from our Muslim neighbors, it means we're slaves to God. We worship God. We're not free people. So, as Levinas would argue, perhaps, that the parting point to freedom is always an unfreedom. You have to accept something, and then we struggle with it. We struggle with Torah, but we say, Na'aseh v'nishma. It wasn't exactly a free choice, and it wasn't exactly freedom. Which brings me back to home, the concept of home that Moshe Halbertal spoke about. If home is where we let our guard down, which is, I completely agree with this definition, Jewishly, it should not be our home. Jewishly, we chose our mythic origin as a house of slavery so that we would never let our guard down to the oppression of the other. We need to bring it home. Home is where we let our guard down, but there are certain things that we must never be desensitized, just like the call of the poor who is outside. We became a people after receiving Torah. I think that those who were left in Egypt were of Jewish extraction, but they were not Jews. They were not a Jewish people. So the lesson is, well, what does it mean for us today? So this is where I'd like to speak a little bit of this Sukkot Shalom. What does it mean that whenever we have a home, we are supposed to build a very vulnerable, temporary home? Yes, we know the agricultural origins, and we know all, we can think of it that way. But the symbol of peace and the symbol, something that is uniquely Jewish, is to go out to your yard. How do you explain it to non-Jews that you go out to your yard and you build the sukkah and you eat there and you even sleep there? Especially in this northern climate or in Manchester where it rains, they just think that we're insane. I think it's something that is relatively unique to us. I'm not speaking as an anthropologist, so I really have no idea, but it is certainly something unique. I think it teaches us that, we're not supposed to be isolated. We're not supposed to be building fortresses. Yes, we can let our guard down inside the fortress, but not because the world is against us, hopefully, or not because we are against the world. We are supposed to have the openness that the Sukkah gives us. We're supposed to welcome guests. I always think of this song, I think that's Nomi Shemer, Shlomit Bona Sukkot Shalom. It's all this Shlomit, which is a female name, meaning peace, and is building this Sukkah of peace where there's room for everyone. And that is something for us to consider, is how do we balance our permanent shelter, feeling at home, with building this sukkah where people who are different than us can also be our guests, and keeping it up as peace needs a lot of maintenance as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I just want to say that it's actually rather intimidating to sit on such a distinguished panel and to speak to an equally distinguished audience. I'm also aware that everyone's probably quite tired, so I'll not talk for too long. I kind of wanted to talk about how home can be more than one place at the same time, and how through exile, expulsion, and a variety of other factors, Jews, particularly in America, through my own historical research, I find can claim several homes and can employ a variety of cultural elements into their American Jewish identity. And that kind of leads me to talking this idea about a home has many rooms, and there are people in different rooms in this house. They're doing different things. They have different things on their mind, and also they have different viewpoints when they're in this home. You can have someone looking at the street, you can have someone looking at the back garden, you can have someone looking at a neighbour's house, and there are all these factors that influence the way we operate within that home. And I wanted sort of to ask the question of, can a home be a cultural identity that we can carry with ourselves wherever we go? And more particularly, can Jews share a home with non-Jewish culture, in that both Jews and non-Jews are together, but separate, but still operating within the same framework of being at home? And so, in particular, in mind, I had my research of Irish Jewish identity in America, where Irish Jews in the 1960s participated in St. Patrick's Day parades. They had a beauty pageant for a Queen Colleen, or sort of a Yiddish Rose of Tralee competition, and the requirements were the Queen Colleen had to be both Jewish and Irish, and she participated in this march in New York, where there's obviously quite a large Jewish population, large Irish population. As well, in New York, there's been a Greek-Jewish festival. I think it's in its second year. And we're moving into this point where it doesn't have to be two sides of a coin. It can be a multifaceted identity, where people realize that there are various steps to where they've gotten now. And being Jewish in America, obviously in other places as well, can combine that American identity, but also the various European or South American or African or Asian identities. And that creates a bridge with which communities can come together and share in this home, this identity of, yes, we have different religions, but we both have the same cultural connection that can build intercultural dialogue and also expand how we think about European identity. Because we cannot think about Europe without its Jewish history. It spans hundreds of years. And without the Jewish history in a number of all European countries, it's an incomplete history, and it has to be carried on. And I just want to leave with that thought.
Thank you so much for coming. I will now open up to questions from the audience, and of course, all different kinds of gender and ages are invited to pose and raise and broaden the conversation. Not everyone at once. Who's first?
You sure you're Jewish?
Actually,
Kiss,
I
kiss,
prefer not to
Kiss
use
the mic. Kiss the mic.
I absolutely hate using microphones. So yes, thank you all for presenting some amazing and interesting responses to the idea of Beit avadim. And it's those words that I want to get you to respond to a little bit. because everyone has responded to Beit avadim as a house of bondage or a house of slavery, which is, of course, the translation that we read in almost any book that translates it. But is it not more accurate to say it's the house of slaves? And if that is the case, would you take a moment to respond to that idea?
It certainly can be, it certainly can be translated that way. And if so, in a way, it strengthens my case. Because if the story in Egypt was after all the window dressing and the stories of how brave and morally integral we were, it's to presume that we were slaves. Yes, we allowed ourselves to be enslaved. This explains possibly in a more generous way why we weren't all that brave all the time, and yet we made it. What I would not like to leave you with is the idea that it really wasn't such a great idea to do this march through the desert and build Eretz Israel. It's obvious that without that idea, we wouldn't be sitting in that room. The argument I'm making is weaker, that this is not the entire story. That this is not the only backbone of our Jewish identity. And I would disagree with you that those who stayed in Egypt were just of Jewish extraction. What does that mean? I'm just of Jewish extraction, and anything above that is what I can manage at this time, at this moment. I find it very understandable that people were not willing to listen to a Michiganer who wanted to walk us through the desert, even if it turned out to be right. The way that people didn't want to listen to Jabotinsky when he said, go, okay, go wherever. Go Uganda, go Argentina, doesn't matter, you'll be slaughtered here. People don't want to hear that. And this unwillingness to hear, this trust in a reality that is not satisfactory, and yet is there, is something I find very important and endearing. And as a person, I can easier identify with that. That's with the Sabras who marched to the desert and built Eretz Israel. It's not about them being wrong and us being right. That would be ridiculous. It's about allowing a space for the avadim, okay? Yes, a Beit, in which they can be not only slaves, but actually grow to the extent they can. Be supported and nourished to the benefit of all of us. They might come in with a few interesting halachot.
I always wondered what it must have felt like to celebrate Passover in Egypt. It's, you know, great Jewish communities in Alexandria and Cairo and so on celebrating. So I think we do need to separate the concept with what it means literally. Yes, I think Beit avadim can certainly be the house of slaves and not necessarily the house of slavery, but I think that in our foundational story, it is the house of slavery because it is a hard work that is being emphasized. And also when it comes to our foundational story as a people, we begin as a people when we leave Egypt. Now, there is certainly, I'm not claiming that the people who stay behind are mere Egyptians of Jewish extraction. What I'm saying is that they're excluded from our post-exilic national narrative. So it's up to them to come up with an identity of their own, had they, you know, and to define it themselves. I don't think that we should. I just think I find it very interesting, but I find it more. I find it less specifically Jewish in its context, and I think that there are other exiles and places where, you know, it would be more relevant. And so I think it is very interesting. What does it mean? Who defines a people? What would have been their voice? We chose to stop the marker and say we define ourselves with Torah and the exile, but what if they said no, we define ourselves with Abraham and Joseph? So, but it is up to them to define. I feel like as outsiders to that narrative, we really cannot speak for it, at least I myself.
I just miss all those Jews. So.
They might be there.
Mhm.
I would just connect to your reminding us about the sukkah, because I think that the sukkah is a reminder of the true existence. We are all in exile all the time. So this is a sort of telling us this is our true home, although it seems like the other one was safer or more secure. But I think an important part of the sukkah is that it is meant for inviting the other, the foreigner. So that is the message of our existence and how it should be. And I think by connecting to the mother's womb, etc., I just wanted to emphasize that the concept of the home is a sort of utopian image, and we should. It's meant for the messianic times. It's where we should strive to reach, and the sukkah is reminding us where we are. So we'll see how far we can come together in the shared house. Thank you for that.
I think that it's also possible to talk about Beit avadim as a container. The house, the Beit is a container. I mean, we talk about Beit the container of the front. And also, I think that it's not so easy to do the non-habitual. And we are talking about habitat and habitual and non-habitual. Yeah, I think we should broaden it a bit. To
How? Broaden it how?
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 Yes, because it's very unusual for people to do the non-habitual because it's not survival. At the first point, is fear. In order to do the non-habitual, you have to have kind of safety, and you have to know what's happening. Otherwise, people shouldn't stay where they know and go to the unknown. Very few people go to the unknown.
You almost have to have a need to do the unusual, because most people, we don't know what is...
Well, I said non-habitual.
Yeah, non-habitual. We almost have to have a need from an outside stimulant for us to do the non-habitual. And that could be an insider who is, who supplies that stimulation because of him or her not necessarily fitting in, which is why Jews actually were very good at doing what you were describing, at sort of pushing the boundaries, because we were insiders, we were inside the home, but we were also, in some ways, outsiders.
If you could start introducing yourselves also, that would be nice.
My name is Alisa Karpenko. I'm originally from Ukraine, but I live in Sweden right now. And
Louder.
oh, sorry. And I have a question. If we have an imaginary, hypothetical situation, right? So you build sukkah, and you have the chance to invite whatever person from whatever historical period in order to have an intercultural dialogue. Whom would that be?
Whoever. It's Sukkah is not a PR gimmick. It's not about a nice way of showing to the goyim how interesting Jews are. It's actually a place where you can listen to each other in a more authentic way because of the weirdness of the place. I mean, the sukkah is so completely unsettling and unnatural, especially, you're right, in our climate. if you build a tent, at least have the common sense of providing a roof, right? If there is no roof, if there's just a make-believe that pretends to protect you from the elements and doesn't, it is such a complete unsettling and such a complete reversal of what the building is supposed to be, that it opens the possibility that we can also unsettle ourselves, right? And some of the weirdest conversations in my life I had in Sukkot, precisely because it's so weird to begin with. So I think that this idea of this Sukkot that complements and reverses Beit avadim is very creative, and I'm very grateful to you for introducing it.
Any other?
And if you were to read the message out of the sukkah, I think, well, first of all, anyone whom you meet who is close to you, but the most important is to invite the other, who is the most foreign to you, whom you need to open a dialogue to. And if you take it metaphorically, to open your home or your house and your conversation with the one whom you fear, or who is the stranger, or even your enemy.
For me, I would actually like to invite the relatives I never had a chance to meet that lived before me, my ancestors in Poland. I'm curious how they celebrated Sukkot, what it must have been like. I'd like to keep it within the home and within the personal, and not as a show and tell. But I say that hoping that the understanding is that my home would be open to invite others any time of year, that I would not need to use Sukkot as a kind of show and tell of this is a Jewish sort of podium, something, a photo op. So I'd like to celebrate my Judaism and sort of like look at the chain of tradition in this personal way, because I feel like in my family, I didn't have a chance to, my parents, my grandparents never left Poland, and I'm just wondering what it was like, who did they invite, and hoping that I build a home that is open to those who disagree with me.
I think as someone who's not Jewish, I would be sort of honored to be invited into someone's sukkah to learn what they want to teach me. I don't think I would go in with any preconceived notions or have an idea, this is what I want to learn. I'm going into someone else's personal space. It's a privilege to be invited into that space. And I think that it is a perfect learning opportunity to then be taught what it is that someone thinks I should be taught. And I think that's important maybe for other non-Jewish people who are interested in Jewish culture, and it's something I myself try to employ, is that I try not to have preconceived notions of what is, I want to learn X, Y, and Z. I come at it, well, what should I learn? What should I be taught? And I think the sukkah we'd be talking about there is actually a really good opportunity, because for a non-Jew, and you see a sukkah, even when you see it on TV, on a program, it was based in Manchester, I think it was Strictly Kosher?
No, it could be.
Something, yeah. Yeah, okay. They were talking about the sukkah, and they even said themselves, this is such a weird thing for someone walking down Manchester to see. And I think that would be a really good starting point, saying, come learn, this is it.
I've never seen a sukkah in the public space of Stockholm, actually. Maybe it's time.
So I'm David Tolero from Barcelona. I'd like to ask if maybe what is common in the different different part of this presentation, is that maybe the idea from this is to deal with illusion, to bring a way to deal with the illusion of foundational myths of going out of the desert of Egypt, going through the desert and finding a new place, and then remembering that there is Beit avadim before that. Maybe the myth is not so complete and so great as we may learn and read in the first time. The same that going out from the house into the sukkah is maybe to break the illusion or to deal with this illusion of shelter. We are in such a strong and perfect house, but then when we go out to live for a week in a sukkah, we understand that maybe all that is just an illusion. It's not the house, it's not the construction that makes the house, the shelter, it's how we feel. We may be in a sukkah that really doesn't protect us, even from very tiny rain, but to feel very secure, because the security is not from the building, it's from us.
I think that's a very useful way of thinking, except that I don't think that myths are there to be shattered. They are to be completed. Look, again, let's face it, if those tough young guys hadn't made it through the desert, we wouldn't be sitting here, okay? We owe it to them. This was Jewish continuity, and this was ultimately exactly what Hashem wanted us to do. It's not that this is an illusion we should disregard it. It's simply that it's not the entire story. Let me tell you a story, okay? Some of you might have seen in Warsaw the monument to the heroes of the ghetto, right? It's this huge stele that on one side has a heroic bas-relief of wonderful, muscular people with a backdrop of flames, with grenades and machine guns and whatever, the fighters. And that's where all the events usually take place, in front of that bas-relief. On the other side, there's a plaque of not heroic-looking people being marched away, guarded by soldiers with guns. I always found it easy to relate to the other side. And I never knew really what, I felt kind of embarrassed and not belonging when I looked at those heroic guys. And one anniversary, we were laying flowers with Marek Edelman, Zichrono Lebracha, who was the surviving commander of the uprising. Marek looked at this sculpture and said, "Ha, nobody in the ghetto was that well fed." So this is the point. The scene that is being presented on that heroic bas-relief is not false. It's not an illusion that needs to be shattered. It needs to be complemented by Marek's comment. This is too nice, okay? People were not that well fed, they were not that heroic. We still owe them that we are here. Again, we owe it to them. But we don't need to make them into what they were not. And we also need to spare a thought about the other side of the matter.
I think that the reason it's our foundational myth is the brilliancy of it to choose to be descendants of slaves and flawed people. There's a lot of chutzpah in that, and there's a lot of humanity in that, and I think that it has served us well, and I think that that is a badge of honor that I'm most proud of as a Jew. It's not to have the lineage of some great warriors and conquerors and people who look like, but that we're aware of their flaws and that we are aware that we come from slaves. I think that's what makes us Jewish. And that's why I'm so proud of our foundational myth, of, if it is a myth, we were slaves. And our Messiah, is illegitimate ancestry, and he was we are a people who are very public about our ancestors' lack of perfection. And it's a badge of honor in my book.
I think the essence of myths, the mythical stories of the Torah or the Bible, is that there is no end to the number of interpretations you can get out of them. They have survived through these millennia because there are so many truths to find out of, and even the what seems not to be how do we say? Det som ser motsägelsefullt ut, what seems contradicting, is just as true. So I think we should really be proud of the heritage that the Jewish tradition has given to the rest of humanity, at least in the three monotheistic religions.
Diana Rose, Pennsylvania University. I was thinking about the symbolism of the Beit avadim and the Exodus, if that could be seen as sort of a road to self-determination, a coming of age, so to speak. Because if you're a slave, you have no self-determination. You have no right to make choices, but you also have no responsibilities. Like you're a child, or for that matter, a woman in pre-modern age, that you have no right to make choices. Someone will make that for you. This sort of resonates with me having two teenagers at home, you know. Could you pick up that plate? What, am I your slave? That at a certain age you long for self-determination, but you don't want the responsibility. The backup plan is if everything fails, they will come home and live with us again. So they want the self-determination, but it's also understandable that they don't want the responsibility. They don't want the paying of the bills, etc. So I'm wondering if we can talk about the story as a sort of the tension between wanting the freedom, but not wanting the responsibility.
Well, certainly, except that nations like people eventually grow up. Like, all of us at age 5 want to be generals, right? But then some of us grow up. The others get to realize the childhood dream. And the point of the revisionist history I was trying to make is that probably what we call slavery wasn't that bad. Otherwise, we end up as complete idiots. I mean, instead of dance, okay, so we danced once after it was the Yam Suf, right? But then we still said, well, I remember the leeks and the garlic and the free fish. If it's just that, then we really don't deserve anything that we got. We're idiots. But it actually might be more. The fact that slavery was not nearly as oppressive and as destructive as we tend to think of it, seen through the prism of later day slaveries. And the idea to rehabilitate Egypt, as it were, is really about this. Accept the fact that this too was part of the Jewish experience, and not only that, we got something from it. The halakha, the consideration for the suffering of others. That it wasn't just a waste of time. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sent there in the first place, right? Frankly, it was much easier for Hashem to have a famine in Eretz Israel seas than to go through the entire rigmarole of sending us to Egypt 400 years, getting us unless it serves a purpose. And that purpose is growing up, learning. And we did that through the Egyptian experience, or so I think.
I have time for a last question or reflection, if you want. You get the chance to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm sorry. My name is Eva Leiser, and I'm a native of Stockholm, and I'm very pleased to be here. I'd like to ask you, when you bring up the thought about that monument that I saw the first time, I found it was unveiled in May 48, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think
April 48.
April 48, yes. It's just in the time of the foundation of Israel. You think it's a connection? When you talk, I mean, there were a war in Israel at the time, right?
Not to the best of my knowledge. I think that this was simply the time it took to build the monument.
To do what?
That this was simply the time it took to have the monument built. There was already a first monument built in 46. It's still standing, that's a small thing. And then took 2 more years to build the big thing. The connection in time with the creation of the state, I think, is accidental.
Accidental?
I think so. or at least I've never seen any evidence of the contrary. The idea that even under socialism you would have such forward planning, you have the construction of something coincide the political event somewhere else, frankly, you're overestimating the machine.
Thank you so much to our distinguished panel. Now I'd like to welcome up Professor Lars Dencik, who is a senior professor of social psychology at Roskilde University and also a member of the Paideia Academic.
Your chair is here. And on that note,
okay, that's still some strength. I am very happy to be here. I feel very honored to be here. I should tell you, perhaps I remember now, that I was part of the task force creating Paideia. We were 4 people then, before it was even established, and I was very proud to be part of that. And I also taught here, Paideia, the first years.
Could you please?
Yeah, well, that would be difficult. If you speak with your hands, then, but I will do my best. It has been a rich day and perhaps a tiring day, and it takes some chutzpah to sit here now to conclude the day. But let me go straight on, and first of all, I'm reminded, speaking of home, and the topic here, one of the first things 25 years ago, I think, Jackie, we published a book called Jewish Identity, and in that book I wrote an article, an essay called "To Be at Home in Homelessness." I don't mean homelessness is our situation now, but I meant what I'm going to speak about here today also, that you can be at home in the diaspora. You can be at home, you can feel at home, you can make it your home, and I think actually it is our home. Starting with some comments to what Konstanty mentioned here today, we became a nation in Egypt. Well, I will dispute that. I think we became a nation in the desert. And that's a very important difference, I think. We became a nation when we got the Torah. And then we got the Torah in no man's land. And that, if you want to stick to metaphors and to the power of metaphors, I think it is very important that it was no man's land. There we were shaped as a nation, because we got the Torah, and that's where we kind of got the traditions, the knowledge, everything that brought us together as a nation. So this no man's land, and then the lesson there. We left, we escaped Egypt. We came into freedom. And that's a long story. In my special field of academic research, social psychology, the notion of the escape from freedom, the flight from freedom, the book by Erich Fromm, a Jewish psychoanalyst, is very well known. And the lesson there, that was stressed here by Lena, I think, the lesson there is we have to learn to live in freedom. And that's not easy, because freedom, exactly what you said, takes responsibility. In slavery, in dictatorships, in totalitarian situations, we have no responsibility. Others take the responsibility. Today, we have lots of freedom. We can stay as Jews, we can leave as Jews, we can be this kind of Jew, we can... there isn't no, this kind of joke, how do you Jew? How do you Jew there? You are a Jew this way, I'm a Jew another way, and we can do different ways. And this is a question all the time in diaspora, because we live in different conditions. There is no universal set of living rules. There is, of course, the Torah, and we have the so-called Jewish laws, halakha, but we make interpretations. That's what Talmud is about. And we can live in different ways, and we may have different local ways of doing it. So I think that is also that we have this responsibility now, and that responsibility is now growing larger and larger, because we have more and more of that kind of freedom. So that, and then another lesson that also was stressed by Kostek, but I want to make it even stronger. It took 40 years. It took 40 years to get out of Egypt, but that's not the main part. It took 40 years at least. It took perhaps 40 generations to get Egypt out of the Jews. And that to get Egypt out of the Jews, to be able to be free, responsible persons, to think for ourselves, to make our own choices, and to face the responsibility that we have towards ourselves, towards our tradition. I mean, that takes some time. So that what that lesson, I think, taught us. And there were many more, because, I mean, I think exactly as you said, there is no accident that the Ten Commandments are introduced by this, that you were yourselves, we were ourselves slaves, because that is another opening to us. We were not only a particular people, a Jewish people, but we also have a universal responsibility. And that universalism that is combined with particularity, that universalism for having to share faith with other people. We were slaves ourselves, there are other slaves now, there are refugees, there are people, and to apply what has become partly the credo of modern diaspora, the credo of universalism, that we have universal human rights, and they should be applied wherever we are, in Sweden, in Israel, or in Poland, wherever they are, we should apply them. That, I think, is one also that you can deduct in a way from the story of the Exodus. That a fundamental lesson. And I think there is it's not an accident that the perhaps most important book, at least the most read book in Jewish tradition, is the Haggadah. The Haggadah, where the basic kind of credo ethos is that, you know, the four young people that ask questions, and then the credo is you yourself, you should feel it as if you yourself were there and then come out. I think that story is the book that is the most read of all books in Jewish history, and it's read every year, and I think it is a very, very important book, and we still read it, and it's very important to read also in the diaspora, because that again and again tells us a story and teaches us a lesson and make us identify with the whole history. So those were a few comments to what you said there, and then I have another further comment that you said, where I also a little bit I don't think I disagree, but I want to make a nuance. Exile can also be home. Exile can also be home. I wouldn't say exile. I would say diaspora. And exile and diaspora is not the same. Exile is when you are forced to leave and stay there against your will. And exile even is not galut. That is even a stronger word. Diaspora is a situation that has been the Jewish predicament for at least 2,000 years, and has become part of our bloodstream in a way, our way of thinking, internalized. We have adapted to it, we have developed creativity, ways of handling power, identity, ethics in relation to the surrounding world. That is all created in the diaspora and became a Jewish thing, so to say. So I think it's better to say that we live here in the diaspora, and I think there is also a value in stressing that. All of us could go to Israel anytime and would be welcome. All of us have not done so. I know perhaps there are some Israelis here, but I mean, most of Jews in the world have not gone to Israel. Have chosen. We can choose. We can all choose. We can go there. We can stay. We can make a Jewish living here, and I think Paideia is all about making a Jewish living here. And I think this is not the topic for the day, but I want to stress it. There is a real danger of idolatry, as you said. There is a real danger of it, because if you sanctify territory, if you sanctify stones and land and all that, then you're very close to idolatry. And I think there are tendencies today in Israel, perhaps more than tendencies. There are strong movements that go in that direction of idolatry, of sanctifying what is stones, sand, land, territory. And if that is becoming a supreme value, then we are in real danger. We are in real danger as Jews, because that will destroy our Judaism. So that was my first remarks. I have a few more. I have to find out. Yes. So, Karin spoke about the two Talmuds. And I think it's important to note that at least my legacy, and I think the legacy of Paideia, is closer to the Babylonian Talmud than to the Yerushalayim, because the Babylonian Talmud, when you speak about the diaspora and speak about the importance of creating a Jewish life wherever you are, is what we are related to here. And here I want to relate also, Barbara, I don't know whether Barbara is here, but anyway.
She's here.
Yes, here. So I want to first of all join the how should I say, the celebration or the thanks for Barbara for having created this, and also for having taught me personally many lessons. And one of the very important lessons that also is the whole core of Paideia is that our home is in our texts. That Paideia is text studies. Paideia is to find our home, belongingness, comfort, all kind of intimacy, whatever we have heard today, in our texts. And I think that is very important to know that this intimacy, I mean, of home in the text, to having what Heine called a portable homeland in our texts, is what we are carrying on here. And this portable homeland is very opposed to, it's most easily spoken in German, to the home in the physical sense. One of my favorite disgusts, if you may say so, is philosopher Heidegger. And in his works, the notion of Heimat, home in that sense, belonging to a place where a people live who is high, superiority over other people, is, and it's best, it's home, of course, Heimat, but in German it has a stronger metaphysical connotation. And then he speaks about Bodenständigkeit, that you belong to the world. He speaks about authenticity, I mean, Eigentlichkeit, such things. And I think, and we have it even in Swedish. We have a notion that very many Swedes are proud of. Folkhem, people's home. And it is a very sympathetic word in some respect, but it's also a dangerous word because it is exclusive. And it is, and I think there is also, when we speak about home and intimacy, I came to, and Moshe mentioned this intimacy as a key element in a home, and mentioned that where you can feel like that kind of, perhaps the presence of God even in the home, where of course that's where we celebrate Shabbat, where we celebrate all important holidays. And I'm reminded of this story about the most intimate of all situations, of course, is the love, the intercourse between man and woman, or between man and man, I don't care who are the contrahensive. But the intimacy in that connection is when Shekhinah is there, when you have that complete, total intimacy. That is also when you have that particular relation to. And that is a Jewish, not only a Jewish story, that is a kind of a Jewish element in Judaism, one could say. And now we all have this home here. I think Paideia, as I now heard, I think Moshe said that Jerusalem is perhaps the most international and the least cosmopolitan of all cities. And I think when I reflect on Paideia, it is in a way, perhaps big words, but it is in a way creating a cosmopolitan Jerusalem. A cosmopolitan Jerusalem where we have people from many, many parts of Europe, we meet with different opinions, we study texts, Central Jewish text, and that is in a way. Vilna was once called the Jerusalem of Vilna, and now we have Paideia is a kind of a little bit of that situation where we have that. And Moshe also spoke about homeland, which is a much, of course, much more difficult concept to grasp. And my note, when I heard him telling about that, I said, is Israel a homeland? By his criteria, it is not. Because by his criteria, it is a place where you don't have to be on guard. But all my cousins in Israel are on the guard all the time. You feel relaxed, you feel safe. No, you feel, and there is lots of controversy. He even called it I don't know what they wanted to be brought into this conflict. He called it, when you have this kind of conflict inside your home, it is close to hell. This is a quote from Moshe, this is what I was. And then he discussed, what do you do when you have that kind of situation? Yeah, he invented the concept of threshold. Okay, the house has to be a threshold. But then he mentioned the price of a threshold. How high can a threshold be? Can it be so high that it covers even the windows? That you can't see through it, that nobody can enter and nobody can out, and that you have a kind of situation? I think that is there are dangers in constructing a homeland. Moshe also said that we have not yet learned to be a majority. We have good experiences in being minorities. We know how to relate to power instead of controlling power. We know how to adapt without losing ourselves and so forth. All that. And I came to think of a phrase in Talmud that I studied with our former chief rabbi, Morton. We spent a long time studying that. And this quote from Pirkei Avot says, love work, hate lordship, and seek no intimacy with ruling power. And I think the last sentence, the danger of having ruling power, the danger that, not only the danger to other people and so forth, that can be destroyed, but the danger to ourselves. The danger that we lose what has become the Jewish legacy is there. And we have indeed to learn to be a majority. And to be a majority or to be a minority, we had a discussion a few days ago with Fanya about a home or a tent on this stage. And I think it's a good point to say that we are more a tent than a home. A tent is moving, a tent is open, a moving tabernacle. But and I came to think when I heard that about Lenny Bruce, you know, the stand-up comedian, when he was dividing the world into what is Jewish and what is Goyish. And he said things like that, what he said, I can't tell. But anyway, he said, camping, apropos tent, is Goyish. Hotels are Jewish. New York is Jewish. Israel is Goyish. That is how it is. Of course, you cannot know, but anyway, hotels are more Jewish than camping, even if you wanted to use the metaphor of a tent. Another quote that came to me when we speak about homes and belongingness and all that is a quote by another Jewish person, the mother of modernism in the sense, Gertrude Stein, when asked about her Jewishness and but the metaphor for belongingness, of course, of home is roots. You have roots here, you have roots there, or Jewish roots. And of course, you can reject the whole idea of roots, but she said, what's the point of roots if you can't bring them along? And I think that is what we have been doing all the time. We have roots. We have long roots back to Torah, back to Sinai, but we have brought them along. And one of those who brought them along and to create what I see as a predecessor for Paideia was my favorite Talmudist, Yochanan ben Zakkai. Yochanan ben Zakkai, as you may know, he was in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was besieged. It was the Zealots were fighting in order to defend the land and all that. And he invented the idea to be kind of smuggled out in a coffin and started the first yeshiva, the first Jewish academy, and started what I would think, how I would perceive also Paideia as the first Beit Midrash, the first house of learning. And I think that is how I conceive of Paideia, a study house where we study, and a study house, a home, a bayit, or Paideia, cannot be closed. It has to be open. It has to be open physically. People of different backgrounds, different denominations should be able to walk in here, take part, and it should be open mentally so that we can open our minds to other ways of thinking, other traditions. And I think in that sense, I would not end this talk by saying good night, but I would say welcome.
Thank you, Ron, Fabian, Kostek, Eva, and Lars. And I also want to say welcome. Welcome up to the third floor of Paideia, where there is now not food for thought, well maybe also, but certainly food. There is a reception going on. So please, the third floor in the old house, there is a reception. You're all very welcome.